Yeah, thank you. Next slide, please. So I would just want to, there has been a lot in 2021. However, the most of the advances in ovarian cancer have been in the patients with type 2 histology, that is those with a high grade serous. And a lot of it still needs to be done for patients who have endometrioid, clear cell, or low grade. So that is what I just wanted to highlight. Next slide, please. So amongst those with high grade serous cancers, we know that if you look at the integrated genomic analysis, there are 4 different subtypes. That is the differentiated, the immune reactive, mesenchymal, and proliferative. So why I would wanted to highlight this is, like, today in the era of targeted therapies, probably in future we would also want to do amongst the high grade serous which targeted therapy to choose for which, and if there are any biomarkers for the same. Next slide, please. And we know that amongst patients who have a high-grade serous ovarian cancer, those who have BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutation comprise about 15% of the patients. But those who have BRCA-NES are almost half of these patients. So next one, please. So it is important that even in India, when we looked at it, about 20% of these patients had germline BRCA mutations. And even amongst those who did not have a family history, about 20% had BRCA mutations. So it is important to understand that amongst these patients, even if they do not have a family history, if we do have the opportunity, we should send all of these patients for germline BRCA testing. Next slide, please. And of course, Dr. Santosh would also want to speak on this later. But I just wanted to highlight that apart from the high-grade serous ovarian cancers, our understanding of mucinous ovarian cancer has also evolved. And today we know that, they have KRAS mutations, and also some of them have HER2 amplification and P53 mutations. And when we look at mucinous carcinomas, they can be of the expansile or the infiltrative subtypes. Of course, as of today's day and age, we treat both mucinous and high-grade serous ovarian cancer with the same chemotherapy of paclitaxel and carboplatin. However, maybe in future, this thing might change and we may have a more tailored therapy. But till then, we treat both mucinous ovarian cancers and high-grade serous with the same chemotherapy. Of course, it is important to exclude any GI primaries whenever we get a mucinous carcinoma. Next slide, please. So till a few years back, the slide was quite simple, and I would just focus my talk now on advanced epithelial ovarian cancer. And till a few years back, in advanced epithelial ovarian cancer, the treatment was paclitaxel and carboplatin. And the question was only whether to give it neoadjuvant or adjuvant. But as today we have seen that we have HIPEC, we have maintenance strategies of PARP and bevacizumab, and therefore we need to see where to place all of these together. So next, please. So we have already known that patients, and it has become today almost established that whether we give neoadjuvant chemotherapy first or we give it in the adjuvant setting, there is no difference and between primary debulking surgery and interval debulking. And we have the pooled analysis from the ORTC and the CHORUS, where the median PFS of 10 months and a median overall survival of 57 months. And this is generally considered lower than the previous trial. And however, and latest addition to this is that of the Scorpion trial. Next one, please. So where this was a more select group of patients, and also this also showed that whether we did primary debulking surgery or NSCT, the outcomes were similar with a median PFS of same 15 months and the overall survival of 40 months. Now, difference in the PFS and the overall survival is probably because of a more targeted therapies being offered. This is a trial which had started later. and also better patient selection and a younger population. These were almost a decade younger. So these are the probable reasons. I would just want you to keep in mind the overall survival and the progression-free survival here. Next slide, please. So importantly, Dr. Somashekar mentioned about the HIPEC trial and the advantages of the HIPEC. But, and of course, we do have even an overall survival benefit with the use of HIPEC. But if you look at the median overall survival with the use of HIPEC was 45 months versus 33.9, that is 34 months, almost a 10-month benefit in overall survival. However, just can you go back to the previous slide? So even if you remember the Scorpion trial also had an overall survival which was similar to that of the HIPEC. So it is important that so to look at the control arm of these two trials, so even without the use of HIPEC, the Scorpion trial had shown a benefit of almost an overall survival, which was similar to that of the use of HIPEC. So I really do not know the reasons for the same. And of course, these are two different trials, and it is not fair to do a cross-trial comparison, but some things to still keep in mind. Next slide, please. So now coming on to the maintenance strategies. Now we have two maintenance strategies. One is the bevacizumab and the other is the PARP inhibitors. And two PARP inhibitors have been approved in the maintenance first line setting, that is the olaparib and the niraparib. Next slide, please. Can you move on to the next slide? Yeah, so we have the ICON 7 trial. We all know the use of bevacizumab in the first line setting. Next one. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I would just want to focus here that these are the long-term results of the ICON 7 trial, where with the use of bevacizumab, and this was 7.5 mg per kg, there was no difference in overall survival in the overall population. However, there was the benefit in those who were high risk, that is those who had pleural effusion or had suboptimal surgeries. So stage 4 disease and suboptimal surgeries were the ones who benefited with the use of bevacizumab. For the others, if they had done an optimal cytoreduction, there was no benefit of the use of adjuvant bevacizumab. So there was no OS benefit. So and even if you look at the progression-free survival, there was a benefit of 2.5 months of PFS only in those patients who did undergo an optimal cytoreduction. And therefore, this kind of emphasizes what Dr. Somashekar has already very well highlighted, that optimal cytoreduction remains one of the mainstay of treatment. Next slide, please. Yeah, so, we have the GOG 218 trial, and you can move on to the next one, please. Yeah. Yeah, can you just keep on moving, please?
Yes, yes.
So what I would just want to highlight, that the ICON 7 and the 218 also, the main difference being that, you used a higher dose of bevacizumab at 15 mg per kg. Just continue moving, please. Yeah, next, please continue moving. Next one, please. Yeah, so I would just want to come here that even in this trial of GOG 218, where even a higher dose of bevacizumab was used, there was no difference in disease-free or overall survival with the use of bevacizumab. And as in the ICON, it was only in the high-risk population that there was a benefit of use of bevacizumab. Next slide, please. Yeah, so if you look, these are the stage 4 patients. It is only in this stage 4 patients that you had a benefit in with the use of bevacizumab. Next slide, please. So this is an important slide which I would want to highlight. Of course, here, what we know is that the benefit of, bevacizumab was not as per the BRCA status. However, important to understand is that those who are BRCA mutated did well irrespective. So, if you look at all the arms which had BRCA mutated, the median overall survival was around 60 months as compared to the median overall survival of 40 months in the non-BRCA mutated. Now, I want you to keep these numbers in mind when we think of and look at the overall survivals with the use of PARP inhibitor. So this is the control arm of the GOG. So the control arm of GOG, that is BRCA positive, no bevacizumab, overall survival with in these patients is around 60 months. So I think that is something that we need to keep in mind, that those who have BRCA mutated, even without the use of bevacizumab, do better. And we'll keep that in mind when we go to subsequent trials. Next slide, please. So, and as I just mentioned, that this is a retrospective data where those who are had BRCA-ness, of course, did better than those who were non-BRCA mutated or had wild type, and that's because BRCA-ness also confirms sensitivity to platinum because they have defects in DNA damage repair. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is, I have summarized all the PARP inhibitor trials in the frontline setting. So now we had looked at the use of BEV in the frontline. Now we are looking at the use of PARP as maintenance in the frontline setting. So we have the SOLO-1 trial, which has looked at olaparib, the PRIMA, which has looked at niraparib. The main difference here being that the SOLO-1 inclusion criteria included only patients who had either a germline or a somatic mutation, whereas in the PRIMA was irrespective of their BRCA mutation. Of course, the Paula one has looked at the addition of olaparib and bevacizumab. However, important to remember is that in the control arm, there was bevacizumab, and we did not have any arm which has looked at only olaparib. So we do not know what is the additional benefit of the use of bevacizumab when we are already using olaparib. And of course, we have the Velia, which has used veliparib in combination with chemotherapy. So usually that is not available to us. So I think the most important results are, we have now the 5-year results of the SOLO-1 trial, where with the use of olaparib, we have a PFS which is almost up to 56 months. So I think that is a PFS which is really kind of unheard of in patients with ovarian cancer. But important to look at, the control arm, and that is a question that I don't know the answer to, as to why the control arm in the bevacizumab arm had, control arm had a PFS of only 13 months. We know that BRCA positive patients have a higher, longer PFS, both from retrospective data and other data, that, the PFS in BRCA positive is almost close to 2 years in the frontline setting. However, here we had a PFS of only 13 months. That is something that we just need to keep in mind while we interpret this data. Next slide, please. So this is again the results from the same. And important to know that even when in the PFS2 was also longer, but interestingly, in the control arm, the first PFS was 13 months and the PFS2 was almost like 42 months. Although what the authors give the reason for this is that subsequent use of PARP inhibitors, but it's a little intriguing that the second PFS is longer than the first one. Next slide, please. Yes, and this is irrespective, there was a benefit of PARP, irrespective of whether the patients had optimal cytoreduction or not. But of course, those who had no residual disease and received PARP had the maximum benefit. Next slide. And of course, we have the use of niraparib also in the frontline maintenance, and the benefit is maximum in those who are either homologous recombinant deficient BRCA mutated or only HRD deficient. So those who are HRD proficient, the benefit is very, very marginal, to the tune of only 3 months. So in the frontline setting, I don't think, that merits the use of PARP, where the PFS benefit is just close only to the tune of 3 months. Next slide, please. And if you look at the adverse events, almost there's a lot of nausea and fatigue. Like 63% of these patients have fatigue, apart from, of course, anemia and thrombocytopenia. Now, you must remember that these are patients who are on maintenance therapy. Now, I can talk, and that is also a difficult question where they have persistent fatigue and nausea. And of course, important to remember is that there is almost a 1% risk of AML or MDS, although the 5-year update of this did not show any increase in the risk of AML or MDS. Next slide, please. So what I would my take-home messages in high-grade serous, I think it has been amply proven that between neoadjuvant surgery and neoadjuvant chemotherapy and primary debulking surgery, there is no difference in survival. And one can have HIPEC for a select population. And maintenance strategy, the probable reason where I would use bevacizumab is possibly stage 4 disease or somebody who's not had an optimal debulking surgery and is non-BRCA mutant. PARP inhibitors in germline or somatic BRCA mutated patients, the PFS is huge. But just a word of caution, and that we still have the OS data which is not available, but definitely something which merits discussion. Next slide, please. So now moving on, next one, please. So now moving on to recurrent ovarian cancers. Next slide, please. So we have already are aware of platinum sensitive resistant recurrences, and of course, as we look at what is new in 2021, we'll look at these two different situations. Next one, please. And we need to keep this in mind whenever we are looking or interpreting the current data, that as the platinum sensitivity increases, as the platinum free interval increases. So, somebody who has relapsed after 2 years, the response to platinum is almost similar, 60%, as one would expect in the front line. Next slide, please. And another important thing is the definition of platinum free interval. Now, we may have a patient who has completed treatment 5 months back, and she's asymptomatic, and her CA-125 starts increasing, from 20 to say 60, and she doesn't have any symptoms. Imaging doesn't show much of disease, and we decide to keep her under observation. And she has a frank progression at 8 months. So would you consider that patient as platinum sensitive or resistant? But as per this treatment point of view, if somebody who has a frank relapse at 8 months, even though she might have had a serological progression at say 4 or 5 months, would probably be treated with a platinum-based doublet. And most of these definitions are from an era where the decisions were based on clinical relapse rather than just on serological progression. Next slide, please. So important to remember is that if we have a platinum-sensitive relapse, the treatment should be with a platinum-based doublet. We should not use a non-platinum agent in a platinum-sensitive relapse. So I think that is one important take-home message that I would want to give. Next slide, please. And whenever we use a platinum-based doublet, we can choose between any of the 3, paclitaxel, liposomal doxo, or gemcitabine, with a difference mainly in their toxicity profile. And those who are partial platinum sensitive, the liposomal doxo may have a small advantage in terms of PFS in those patients. And of course, we have less peripheral neuropathy and hypersensitivity reactions. Next slide, please. So in the, what are the targeted therapies that we can use in the platinum sensitive setting? So we, again, coming on to the 2 targets, bevacizumab and PARP inhibitors, we know that the addition of bevacizumab to keep a platinum-based doublet, in this case, a gemcitabine and carboplatin, improved the progression-free survival from 8 months to 12 months. However, there was no difference in overall survival. That's same as 32 months. Next slide, please. And then we have that in those patients who are BRCA mutated, can we, what has PARP maintenance given us an overall survival of? In those patients who are BRCA mutated, the use of PARP inhibitors after a platinum-based chemotherapy and after they've had a response to a platinum-based chemotherapy, the overall survival has improved from 38 months to 51 months. Now that is an improvement in overall survival, and one of the settings where PARP has shown an improvement in overall setting, in overall survival. Next slide, please. However, important to know that, everything comes at a cost. When we are using PARP inhibitors in the second line, the updated analysis has shown that the incidence of an AML or MDS is close to 8%. Now, what does 8% mean? That almost 1 in 12 patients that we treat with a PARP inhibitor is likely to have an AML or MDS. So that is a concern, and something to be kept in mind whenever we counsel regarding the benefits of PARP inhibitors. Next slide, please. Of course, and there is, pneumonitis in about 2% of these patients, apart from anemia and thrombocytopenia. And of course, you can use any of the other PARP inhibitors. Niraparib is irrespective of whether they are BRCA positive or not, and it is only if they have had a response to platinum, one can use niraparib. But as I have shown that, the majority of the benefit is limited to those who are either BRCA mutated or have an HRD deficiency, whereas those who are HR proficient, there the benefit of PARP is very marginal. Next slide, please. And of course, most of the side effects occur in the initial 5 to 6 months, and after you dose reduce, the side effect profile is less. Next one. And similar to olaparib, here again, hematological toxicity is some patients just keep complaining of fatigue, something to the extent that they can't lift a jug of water. That's the kind of answer that they give, and that may have an impact on the quality of life. Next slide, please. And of course, the other PARP inhibitors, again, rucaparib can be used irrespective of whether they are BRCA mutated or not. But as with niraparib, the maximum benefit is seen in patients who are BRCA mutated. Whereas those who are not BRCA mutated and HR proficient, again, the benefit is marginal. So that needs to be kept in mind. Next slide, please. And important to remember is that, again, who are the ones who benefit from, who are excellent responders? They are the ones who had a long platinum-free interval and had no measurable disease at baseline. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So important is that, as we saw, the ones who have an excellent response are also the ones who had a higher incidence of AML and MDS. So it could be that, they've used it for a longer time, or it could also be because the very factors which predict for an excellent response are also the ones which could probably be the reason for them developing an AML. Next slide, please. Yeah, next one, sorry. So therefore, we have seen, two situations where we can use PARP. We have seen PARP in first line maintenance. We've seen PARP in second line maintenance. And you can, olaparib is only in those who are BRCA mutated, whereas niraparib or rucaparib can be used irrespective of whether they are BRCA mutated or not. But of course, the benefit is very marginal in those who are HR proficient and non-BRCA mutated. Now, other thing is, we have the SOLO3 trial where if a patient has received more than 2 lines of platinum, can you use a single agent PARP inhibitors? And, it's a single oral tablet which can be used. Now, I would just want to highlight that, this is olaparib versus the control arm is a non-platinum chemotherapy in a platinum sensitive relapse. Now, we all know that in those patients who are platinum sensitive, the standard of care is a platinum-based doublet. So I think here, and also in patients who are BRCA1 and 2 mutated, they are more sensitive to platinum. So using a non-platinum comparator and then saying that olaparib has, of course, it outsmarted the non-platinum comparator because the comparator arm did not have platinum. Olaparib did better as compared to single agent other drugs. However, I think where we can put the Solo 3 to use is that, and important is that in Solo 3, there were several patients who received even more than 3 or 4 or 5 lines of therapy. And we know that in many of these patients who are BRCA mutated and have received several lines of platinum, giving an IV chemotherapy may be difficult, or they may have had a hypersensitivity to platinum. So probably that is a situation where one can use a single agent olaparib. One will not definitely use a single agent olaparib in somebody who's relapsed after a 2-year period. There, our choice of therapy would definitely be a platinum-based doublet. Next slide, please. And so, of course, here, as we saw that the response rates are, of course, better with olaparib because the comparator arm was weak. Next slide, please. So all this we had spoken of in the platinum sensitive setting, and in the platinum resistant relapse, that is those who are patients who are relapsing within 6 months of the completion of the last platinum. We have several chemotherapeutic agents, of course, like pegylated liposomal doxorubicin, weekly Pacli, weekly gemcitabine, oral etoposide. However, and of course, we have the use of bevacizumab. PARP inhibitors are generally not recommended for platinum resistant because if they're platinum resistant, then they're likely to be PARP resistant. And important to remember is that, in these patients, palliative care also remains an option because in many of these, the survivals are anywhere between 6 to 8 months, and palliative care is an important component. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned that one of the targeted therapies which can be used is the use of bevacizumab in these patients, along with either weekly paclitaxel or liposomal doxo. Next slide. So, and here, if you see the progression-free survival, the benefit in progression-free survival is from 3.4 to 6.7 months. So even, with the best of therapy with bevacizumab, the PFS is close to 6 months. And therefore, if somebody is in good PS, especially the ones who present with recurrent ascites, I think there bevacizumab is something which has shown to really give them symptomatic benefit with reduction in ascites. But someone who has a very poor ECOG performance status, multiple bowel involvement, those are the patients where, there would be a higher risk of perforation and something that you would not use. Next slide, please. And now looking at the role of PARP. So in this situation, of course, we had the Ariel 4 study population, which also included platinum resistant patients with the use of rucaparib, but they also had both platinum sensitive and partially and fully platinum sensitive patients. Next slide, please. And yes, so they were randomized to receiving either rucaparib alone or the chemotherapy. And in the overall PFS, there was an improvement in PFS from almost 5 to 7 months. Next slide, please. However, it's about a 2-month PFS benefit. So one really needs to think how we can, what to make of it. Next slide, please. Yeah, the next one. And important to remember is that, as I mentioned, that those who are platinum resistant are also PARP resistant. And the cancer finds ways and means of reversing everything. So we have PARP inhibitors targeting PARP. So the cancer decides to have BRCA reversion mutation. And of course, if they have a BRCA reversion mutation, they are likely to become resistant to both platinum and PARP. And in this situation, of course, chemotherapy fares better. Next slide, please. So, and that is what I was mentioning too, that, BRCA-ness is the reason for an ovarian cancer being sensitive to both platinum and PARP. And once once they become platinum resistant, they become PARP resistant. What we do not know an answer today is that once we start using PARP inhibitors in the first line setting, and once they progress after PARP, how much they will respond to second line platinum, and whether our definitions of platinum sensitive and resistant will change. So that is something I think a longer follow-up of the first line trials will let us know. Next slide, please. Yes, and as I said that, there is a word of caution as we look at all the PARP inhibitors, is because with the use of PARP has shown that there is an increase in clonal hematopoiesis, and that is something that is important. And in many cases, the development of the AML is either on treatment after 2 years, or even after 1.5 years after stopping treatment. So that is something that we need to keep in mind, and a word of caution with the use of PARP. Next slide, please. So I think in recurrent ovarian cancers, it is important to decide when to treat. And in those who are platinum sensitive, the bottom line is to use a platinum-based doublet. And of course, if they are BRCA mutated or have HRD positivity, so in those cases, we can use PARP inhibitor maintenance. And this is the setting actually where it has shown at least an overall survival benefit. And non-HRD and non-BRCA mutated, one can use bevacizumab, understanding that there is no OS benefit, but a small PFS benefit in these patients. And in platinum resistant, I think palliative care remains the bottom line, and use of a non-platinum agent with bevacizumab in an appropriately selected patient. I think those would be my take-home messages. Yeah, thank you. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. And I think we still have a lot to learn and understand in ovarian cancer.